The first contraction hit at 11:14 that night. My husband had promised he would be there.
At 11:47, a photograph arrived. He was signing a marriage register, and the woman beside him was my sister. I did not scream. I had a child to deliver and a life to take back.
My Korean Mafia boss husband married my sister. I married his rival in my hidden revenge. The first contraction hit at 11:14 in the evening. I gripped the metal bar on the side of the hospital bed and breathed through it the way the videos had taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. Every muscle in my body doing the one job it had been waiting 9 months to do. The room smelled like antiseptic and cold air. The fluorescent light above my bed buzzed faintly every 30 seconds. I had been listening to that buzz for 4 hours. Park Hyun-woo's phone went to voicemail for the third time. His recorded voice said, "Leave a message." I set my phone on the bedside table without leaving one. He knew I was in labor. He had known since 7 in the evening when my water broke in the kitchen of our apartment, and I called him from the floor, one hand pressed to the counter, the other holding the phone. He had said, I'll be there. He had said, "Don't move." He had said my name the way he said it when he wanted me to believe him. I believed him. That was still my first mistake at 11:15 in the evening on a Thursday in March. The second contraction came at 11:21. At 11:47, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a message. From a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. My hands were shaking from the last wave of pain, and I was trying to remember to breathe. But something made me reach for it. The message was one photograph. Park Hyun-woo in a white dress shirt, black tie, standing at a registry desk in what looked like the private room of a hotel I recognized. The Silk Room at the Bike Grand, the same hotel where his family held every formal signing, every alliance dinner, every deal that needed a witness. He was signing a marriage register. The woman beside him wore white. She had the same curls I had, the same jaw, the same eyes, from a different angle, in a different light. She was my sister. Her name was Camille Bridges, and she was marrying my husband on the same night I was delivering his child. I set the phone down, screen down. I looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed. I breathed. I had a baby to deliver. If you have ever received news so disgraceful that your body went completely still, because breaking down was a luxury you could not afford in that moment, drop your city in the comments right now. Because what I did next was not strength. It was the only thing left when everything else had been taken. I did not scream. I did not call him back. I did not call Camille. I did not cry, not that night, not in that room, not in front of the nurses who came to check on me every 20 minutes. I breathed through the next contraction, and the one after that, and every one that followed until 4:47 in the morning when my son arrived in the world at 7 pounds and 3 ounces with his father S eyes and his grandfather S stubborn jaw. I held him for 12 minutes. Then I asked the nurse for the discharge papers. She blinked. "Miss Park, it's standard procedure to stay. At least I know," I said. "I want the papers." She brought them. I signed with my maiden name. Nia Bridges. Not Park. Never again Park. Let me tell you who Park Hyun-woo was, because if you don't understand what he was, you won't understand how long I had been watching him. He was the head of the Park family operation, the most feared Korean mafia boss on the east side of the city. Not feared the way actors in movies are feared. Feared the way weather is feared. Something powerful that moves according to its own logic and does not concern itself with what it damages in passing. He walked into the hotel restaurant where I worked on a Thursday in February 3 years earlier. He sat at the counter. He ordered bibimbap and a glass of water, and he tipped 30% without looking at me while he did it, which told me he was precise but didn't need to be seen being generous. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. By the 6th Thursday, he asked me if I would have dinner with him. By the 10th, I had already started losing the argument I was making with myself about why this was a bad idea. He was dangerous. I knew that. I was not naive. But dangerous men can be kind in private, and Park Hyun-woo was to me, specifically, very kind in private. He brought me things he remembered ID mentioned once. He asked questions and listened to the full answer. He laughed at the right moments without performing it. I fell for him the way you fall when you don't know the ground is closer than you thought. By the time I understood the distance, I was already falling. We had been married for 14 months when I found Camille's scarf. It was navy blue with small gold threads. A birthday gift I had helped her pick out the previous October. I found it tucked behind one of the decorative pillows on our bedroom bench, pressed flat like someone had left it in a hurry and forgotten it was there. I held it in both hands for about 30 seconds. Then I folded it neatly. I placed it in the back of my closet. I went to make dinner. I did not ask Hyunwoo about it that night, or the night after, or for 6 months. That is not weakness. That is something more important. Patience and evidence collection, which are the two things a woman needs when a powerful man has decided he can manage both sides of the truth. I watched. I listened. I documented. I also called my father's old attorney. My father, Franklin Bridges, had died 2 years before I met Hyunwoo. He had been a quiet, precise man who built a small investment portfolio over 40 years and lost most of it in the last 2 years of his life to a business deal that had gone wrong. He never fully explained how. He just said, "Someone moved the ground under me, Nia. I wasn't fast enough." He died without knowing I intended to find out who had moved it. What I found, slowly, across 3 years of careful research, was this. Franklin Bridges had been one of 3 silent investors in a land acquisition partnership with a company called Choi Investments. It was a significant deal, commercial property on the east side of the city, the kind of location that appreciates quietly for 20 years and then becomes worth 10 times what anyone paid. The partnership was destroyed by a competing bid, a fraudulent one, a document submitted under a false name by a legal team that, when you traced it back carefully enough, worked for the Park family. For Park Hyunwoo's family, my father's investment was wiped. His health declined. He died 18 months later. And Park Hyunwoo, who had orchestrated the fraud, married his daughter 3 years after that without ever investigating who she was beyond the woman at the hotel counter who smiled at him on Thursdays. He married his mistake without knowing it. I knew it. I had known it for almost 2 years when I found Camille's scarf. The question was never whether to act. The question was when, and in what order, and with whose help. That brings me to the photograph message. After my son was born, after I signed the discharge papers with my maiden name, and the nurse looked at me with an expression she was trying not to let become pity, I walked to the entrance of the hospital at 5:14 in the morning with one bag and my son wrapped in the hospital blanket. A car was waiting. Black. Unmarked. The driver stood by the rear door. He handed me a folded note. It said, "Safe house. Private doctor. Whatever you need is already there." I got in. I did not look back at the hospital entrance. The car belonged to Choi Sejin. Choi Sejin was the man Hyunwoo feared most. They had grown up on opposite sides of the same industry, competing for the same territories, the same contracts, the same allies for 15 years. Hyunwoo had won more rounds, but Sejin had never lost the ones that mattered. I had met him exactly once. 6 months before the birth, I had gone to the hotel to close out my last shift before maternity leave. My father had always kept a reserved table at the back of the restaurant, a habit I had maintained out of the same instinct you keep a dead person's habit sometimes, because stopping feels like a second goodbye. A man was sitting at it. He stood when I approached. He was quiet in the way that had nothing to do with timidity. His eyes moved to me with an attention that was deliberate, not casual. "My name is Choi Sejin," he said. "Your father and my father were partners before Park Hyunwoo destroyed that partnership. I think you already know that." I looked at him. "I've done my research," I said. "I know," he said. "So have I. Yours is more thorough." I sat down across from him. We talked for 40 minutes. He showed me his father's copy of the original partnership agreement. I showed him nothing yet, but I memorized the gap between his records and mine, and understood that together we had something neither of us had alone, a complete chain of evidence. When we finished, he placed a card on the table. "I want nothing from you right now," he said. "I have waited 7 years to act on this. I can wait until the moment is right for both of us." He stood. "But take this number. In case you need it before then." I took it. 6 months later, When the photograph arrived at 11:47 in the evening while I was in labor, the message came from that number. You are safe. 2 words. I understood everything they carried. Comment loyal below if you believe the most powerful form of revenge is the kind no one sees coming, because the next part of this story is going to show you exactly what 7 years of quiet preparation looks like when it finally arrives in the room. The safe house was on the 3rd floor of a building on the north side of the city. Clean. 2 bedrooms. Quiet. A private doctor came the first morning to check on both of us. He left a number and said to call if anything changed. Sejin did not come for 2 weeks. When he did, he brought food. Korean side dishes his housekeeper had made kimchi, japchae, braised potatoes. He left them outside the door without knocking. On the 3rd week, I opened the door before he could leave. He stood in the hallway with a covered dish in both hands, looking slightly surprised. You don't have to do this, I said. I know, he said. Then why? He thought about it honestly, which I had noticed was one of his habits. He didn't reach for an answer before he had one. Your father fed my family when my father's business was struggling. He didn't make it into a transaction. He just did it. He looked at the dish. This is not a transaction either. It's just food. I stepped back and let him in. That was the first test I gave him without planning to. He passed it by not noticing it was a test. That is how you know a man is worth watching. He came twice a week after that. He sat at the kitchen table. He asked questions about my son with genuine interest, not politeness. He told me about the fraud documents he held, not to impress me, but because he thought I deserved the full picture. Why didn't you use them in 7 years? I asked one evening. Because using them alone would have produced a legal outcome, he said. Using them with you produces a permanent one. Hunwoo can fight a document. He cannot fight the woman he stole from twice. I looked at him. He doesn't know you exist, Sejin said. He looked at you for 3 years and saw a waitress who fell in love with him. He never looked past that. Some men are so confident in their own story that they forget to investigate the chapters they didn't write. What Park Hyunwoo did when he arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning is something I only heard about later, from the nurse who checked in on room 412. He knocked first. Then he pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was made. The bassinet was pushed to the wall. The small overnight bag ID brought was gone. The only thing remaining was the hospital bracelet Mother S side, which I had left on the bedside table because I didn't want to take anything from that building that I hadn't brought in myself. He stood in the doorway for a long time. The nurse said he didn't say anything. He just looked at the empty room, the way people look at things they caused, and are only now beginning to understand the size of. He called my phone. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called Camille. She was asleep. She didn't know where I was. He sat in the chair beside the empty bed for 20 minutes. Then he started making calls. I know this because Sejin told me later. He had people watching the hospital that morning not to intercept Hunwoo, but to confirm his reaction. What a man does in the first hour after losing something tells you more about him than anything he says when he still thinks he has it. Hyunwoo's first call was to his security team. His second call was to his attorney. He did not call the police. He did not call a hospital social worker. He did not call anyone whose job it would have been to confirm his wife and newborn child were safe. He called the people who could help him locate something he had lost, not protect something he loved. That distinction was the last piece of evidence I needed. What Hyunwoo Park never understood about our interracial slow-burn romance, if he ever thought of it that way, was that I had spent 3 years watching him study everything that could affect his empire and nothing that could affect his life. He tracked business rivals with precision. He remembered the names of every attorney, every ally, every competitor across 6 territories. He was meticulous about power. But he never tracked me, never studied me. Never asked about the quiet hours I spent after his meetings, reading contracts and ownership records and the business history of a land deal that had destroyed my father 7 years before we met. He assumed my silence was peace. It was preparation. There is a type of story people in this genre call an underdog story. A woman who appears powerless discovering she is not. They tell it like a surprise ending. But for the woman living it, there is no surprise. There is only the long, methodical work of becoming something the room hasn't accounted for yet. I built Coleman Catering later, Coleman Hospitality across 3 years of late nights and early mornings. I started with retirement dinners. I ended with diplomatic events across 4 cities. Not because I was lucky, because I treated every contract like evidence, every connection like a long-term investment, and every quiet hour like the most valuable resource I had. By the time I signed my son's birth certificate, my company was solvent, my legal team was retained, and the documents I needed had been sitting in 3 separate legal offices for 11 days. Hunwoo thought he had married a waitress who loved him. He had married a woman who had been doing her due diligence on him from the 2nd year of their relationship. Some people call this kind of story a faceless YouTube romance, a voice telling a story no one face can fully represent because it belongs to every woman who has ever been measured by what someone else decided she was worth. That is the most accurate thing I can tell you about what this was. It was not a mafia boss love story. It was not a revenge fantasy. It was the audiobook romance of a woman reading her own life out loud, chapter by chapter, until she reached the one where she held all the documents. The chapter where she handed them to the right man. And the right man handed them back to her. He found the safe house on the 35th day. I had expected this. Hyunwoo had resources and, more importantly, ego. A missing wife and child were a story he needed to control before anyone else could tell it. He came on a Saturday morning. He brought Camille. I had the door open before he reached it. I was holding my son. He looked at the baby first. Something moved across his face, not guilt, exactly. Recognition. Like he was seeing something he had calculated wrong. "Nia, come in," I said. "Both of you." That surprised him. He had prepared for tears or a locked door. I watched him recalibrate. I led them to the living room table. A folder sat in the center. "Sit down," I said. "I want you to meet your son before we deal with everything else." He held the baby. I watched him hold my son and I felt nothing sentimental about it. What I felt was clarifying. This was the last moment of any version of this where he could believe he still held something I needed from him. He handed my son back. I placed him in the bassinet near the window. Then I opened the folder. "This is the original partnership agreement between Franklin Bridges and Choi Investments," I said. I placed it on the table. "This is the fraudulent competing bid submitted under your family's legal team. This is the ownership transfer that followed. And this is my father's death certificate. He died 18 months after you destroyed everything he built." I placed each document flat. "You married his daughter," I said. "You just never investigated who she was." The room was completely silent. Camille looked at the documents, then at Hyunwoo. "You told me her father was a restaurant worker," she said. "He was," Hyunwoo said. "Eventually." That one word, eventually, was the moment Camille understood the man she had chosen. A man who reduced people to their lowest point and treated it as the whole story. She looked at me. I looked back without pity and without mercy. I was not there to comfort her sister, but I was not there to comfort her either. "You chose him," I said. "That's yours to carry." I placed a second document on the table. "These records are filed with 3 independent legal offices. If you contest this document," I tapped the transfer agreement. "All 3 offices release their copies simultaneously. Every account associated with the fraudulent bid, every transaction that followed, every property and contract that was built on what you stole." Hyunwoo's jaw tightened. "This is theft," he said. "No," I said. "Theft was 7 years ago. This is restitution." The front door opened. Choi Sejin walked in with 2 men and a leather briefcase. He did not look at Hyunwoo immediately. He looked at me. A brief check, the kind someone makes when they want to confirm you re all right before the difficult part begins. Then he looked at Hunwoo. "You should sign the document," he said. Hunwoo stood. Every muscle in him went rigid the way they do with men accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room and suddenly unsure if they still are. "You planned this." I waited, Sejin said. "There's a difference. One takes anger. The other takes discipline." Hunwoo looked at me. "If I sign this, what happens to us?" "There is no us," I said. "There stopped being an us the night Camille's scarf appeared in our bedroom and you looked me in the eye and said it meant nothing." He flinched. "I didn't, T. Sign the document. Hunwoo." He signed. "Before I tell you what came next, I need to ask you something. What is the difference between revenge and restoration? Tell me in the comments below. Because what happened after that signature will make you sit with that question for a very long time. After they left, Sejin stayed. He sat at the table and did not try to make the silence into something else. He let it be what it was, the sound of a chapter closing. He's going to try to contest it, I said. Probably. For about 11 days. You sound certain. His attorney is good, Sejin said. Good attorneys give honest timelines. I looked at my son asleep in the bassinet. You waited 7 years, I said. Used everything you'd been holding. For a woman you met once. For the right outcome, he said. Which required the right person to be standing in the room when the documents landed. What if I hadn't been? He was quiet for a moment. I believed you would be. Your father raised someone patient enough to collect what she needed and clear-headed enough to use it correctly. I trusted his judgment. I did not marry Choi Sejin as an act of revenge. I want to be precise about that, because the story sounds like revenge from the outside. I know how it reads. People hear it and think she did it to wound him. She didn't. I didn't. I married Sejin on a Tuesday afternoon in a courthouse with my grandmother and my cousin Riva as witnesses. No flowers, no arch, no dress borrowed from anyone or selected to make a point. I wore ivory. I held my son on my left arm. I signed with my right hand. Sejin had asked me 3 times across 4 months. The first time I said no. The second time I said not yet. The third time he asked, it was a Saturday morning in the safe house kitchen, and he set a cup of coffee in front of me before he said anything. He said, "I'm meters asking again." I said, "Ask me after the documents clear." They cleared on a Friday. He asked on Saturday. I said, "Yes, but this is a partnership, not a possession. I am not available to be owned by anyone, including a man I respect." He nodded. I have never wanted anything that wasn't offered willingly. I would find a possessed thing uninteresting. That was the moment I knew. Not because it was romantic, because it was true. Hyunwoo contested the signing for 11 days. His attorney advised him to stop on the 12th. The documents were authenticated across 3 jurisdictions. The fraud was provable. He signed the release on a Wednesday morning. On Thursday, a press release went out from Choi Enterprises announcing the restoration of the Bridges family partnership, a correction of a historical fraud. The Bridges name appeared in a public statement from one of the most powerful families in the city for the first time in 7 years. My father's name, made accurate again. Camille called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. I was giving my son his bath. Some calls need to be answered. Some chapters, once closed, should stay that way. There is something I want you to understand before I close this story. Park Hyunwoo was not a man who failed to love me. He was a man who never studied me. There is a difference. He saw a waitress who smiled at him on Thursdays, and he made a calculation about what she could and couldn't do, and he built 3 years of choices on that calculation. He never asked who my father was. He never asked what I studied in the quiet hours after his meetings ran long, or why I kept my father's attorney's number saved under a name that wasn't his. He never asked because he had already decided the answer was nothing that matters. That assumption was the only thing he ever gave me that I am genuinely grateful for, because an underestimated woman is a woman with time. Choi Sejin gave me something different. He did not hand me my power. He waited while I located it myself. He brought food to a door he didn't knock on, and answered questions without performing the answers, and asked me to marry him 3 times, and accepted no twice without making it about himself. He told me once, when I asked why he had kept the documents for 7 years, because the restoration had to belong to the right person. Documents without the right hands holding them are just paper. Your father's name needed to be cleared by someone who carries it. That is the kind of sentence that lands differently at 4 in the morning when you are nursing a 7-week-old baby and finally beginning to understand that the life you are rebuilding is wider than the one that was taken. I am not telling you this story to celebrate what I survived. I am telling it because I want you to understand something about silence. For 3 years, I was quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, because I was building the thing that would make my words matter when I finally said them. A woman who reacts hands the other person the story. A woman who prepares hands them the bill. I handed Hyunwoo his bill in a room full of witnesses, holding my son, with 7 years of evidence on a table, and Choi Sejin standing at the door. What happened in that room was the end of a real calculation made by a woman who chose herself before she had the language for it. She chose herself the night she folded her sister's scarf and went to make dinner. She chose herself when she signed the discharge papers with her maiden name at 5 in the morning. She chose herself when she got into a car she hadn't called, driven by a man she trusted because he had spent 6 months earning it without being asked to. Every choice was quiet, every choice compounded, and when the moment finally came, she was ready. Be the woman who is ready. Build in the silence. Study in the margins. Trust the people who give you time instead of deadlines. The ones who underestimate you will eventually hand you every document you need to correct the record. When they do, be thorough. If this story found you in a moment where someone you loved chose someone else, and you went quiet because breaking down wasn't something you could afford right now, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you were watching from. Tell me what staying quiet is costing you. Tell me what it is building. I will be reading every single reply. I love you. Be safe out there.